Okay, welcome to part two of Queen Esther Woman Know Thy Worth. Hopefully, you have read or listened to Ruth chapter 1. We've already discussed parts 1, B, and C. And the purpose of this channel is to remind women, young, middle aged, old, girls, teenage, preteens, regardless of what your profession is, your occupation, your economic status, just to remind you that as women, as females, we have self-worth, we are of value, and we are here for a God-given purpose. This session will be focusing on Ruth chapter 2. And this is just a recap of the first chapter. Ruth is a young Moabitess woman who immigrated from Moab to Israel with her mother-in-law Naomi, and this moved allow Ruth's purpose to come to fruition, and we see that she was significantly blessed just from making this move. And sometimes, in order for certain things to be accomplished in our lives, we have to make a move or we have to shift. Sometimes that move might be physical, sometimes it's a mental move. Sometimes we just have to cut off some people in order to grow and mature and move forward. Sometimes we have to end some negative relationships in order to grow and mature and move forward. Whenever you have time, hopefully next day or so, you will either read or listen to Ruth chapter 2, and I hope that you are blessed by listening to this teaching. You can always post your comments. You can invite others that you know who would benefit from this broadcast to subscribe to the Queen Esther Know Thy Worth channel. So we're going to start off with Ruth chapter 2. And in this, we know that now Ruth and Naomi are back in Israel. So it begins thus, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she, Naomi, said unto Ruth, Go, my daughter. So in the first verse, we are now introduced to Boaz, and the Bible tells that Boaz was wealthy. And he also was a mighty man, which means he had influence. And as I said in the first chapter, that in these days, in those ancient times, women did not work, did not earn a living, and so they depend on if they were married, their husbands, if they were widows, if they have grown adult sons, they depend on their sons or some other male relative to kind of take care of them. So widows tend to be poor, and God has a special place in his heart, for widows. Widows and orphans are special people to God, and anyone who abused widows and orphans were in trouble with God. So you have both these women who are both widows. Naomi is the mother-in-law, so she's more mature. She has lost her 2 sons and her husband. Ruth, which was married to one of Naomi's son, Mahlon, is also a widow. And so in order for them to eat, they would have to go into other people's field to glean. And we know, or if you don't know, when farmers reap their crops, they are not supposed to reap everything. They're supposed to leave something behind for poor people to come and take, so the poor people can eat. So right now we're in verse 3. And Ruth went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. So Right now I'm reading from the King James Version, which is kind of old English. So when they say hap, it means that she happened to end up in Boaz's field. And Boaz is actually a relative of Naomi's deceased husband, Elimelech. And we know nothing happens by chance. We know that everything is ordained by God. And I believe that God led Ruth onto Boaz's field. And at this time, Ruth did not know Boaz or who the field belonged to. So as I said, it was something that God led her to. And even as we go each day as women, we need to seek God's direction. We need to be at the place where we can be led by God. We need to be at the place where we know when God is speaking to us. Sometimes He tells us, don't take this usual route to work or to school. Go a different route. So we need to be in tune so when God speaks to us that we are able to hear. When I believe it was Elijah was in the cave. He was listening out for God. The whirlwind came, the fire came, all these loud noises came. And he actually recognized God's voice when he heard that still small voice. A lot of time we're waiting for the thunder clap and all that stuff. And sometimes it's just a small voice, very quiet voice telling us, what to do. And so we have to be meditate. We have to be in an atmosphere to meditate, and to listen out for the voice of God. So now we are at verse 4. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers, the Lord be with you. So he's greeting the people who work for him. And, as saints, there is a particular way to greet each other. The Bible said we should greet one another with a holy kiss. That doesn't mean we go smack somebody on the lips. In some cultures, or even with the mafia, when you see them greet each other, they sometimes they kind of do the jaw thing. But there is a particular way, and each culture may be different. But there is a proper way for us to greet each other. So he saw his reapers and the people who work for him, and he said, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless you. Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers. So the servant that was in charge, he said to him, whose damsel is this? So Boaz was out of town, has returned home, and saw Ruth gleaning in his field, and he took notice of her. And, he said, whose damsel it is. A damsel, it refers to a young woman. Most times they are unmarried. In this case, Ruth is actually a widow, but Boaz doesn't know her. We just recognize that she's a young woman, which kind of indicates that Boaz is a much older man. And we'll see later on that he is, in fact, much older than Ruth, even though the Bible does not give his exact age. And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, it is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, meaning Ruth, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. So apparently before she started gleaning or picking of what was left after the reapers, she actually asked permission to do this. And regardless of what we do, there are certain protocols. I think, in modern society, what we have gotten away from is good manners. And my mother always tells me good manners will take you places, will take you through the world. And, those two magic words that we learned when we were very young, please and thank you, you'd be surprised at how much can get done with being polite and being grateful to folks. And so, Ruth asked permission before she started gleaning in Boaz's field. And as parents, as caregivers, That's part of the responsibility of mothers, grandmothers, aunts, is to teach children good manners, how to greet when you see someone, to ask permission before you jump and start doing anything. I know you have children come to visit your house, and get up and walk and start opening the refrigerator without asking permission, as if they live there. And I remember even as a child growing up, even in my own home, before we can go taking stuff, taking snacks, we have to ask our mother for permission. We find that whether it's a problem with one generation not teaching the other, that we have gotten away from that a lot of children now are very ill-mannered, and that's probably because lack of proper home training, and that is definitely a responsibility of both parents. But right now I'm speaking to women, as women, parents, grandparents, aunts, caregivers. It's our responsibility to teach our younger relatives good manners. And so right now I'm at verse 7. So no, I'm verse 8. Then said Boaz unto Ruth, hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. And so that tells me that there are young women who regularly gleaned in a particular field. So there are certain young women who would glean in Boaz's field, and he called those his maidens. And clearly Ruth had found favor in the sight of Boaz. And so he's telling her, you don't need to go elsewhere to glean. You can just glean in my field. And I heard a pastor once said that favor is not fear. If you have God's favor upon your life, you will find that you will beat out somebody for a promotion or for a position who appears more qualified than you. But when you have God's favor, you will find that doors will just will open up, for you. Now verse 9 said, let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn. And so favor from Boaz to Ruth continued, and Boaz is being proprietary. He clearly is interested in Ruth, and so he's telling the young men, because remember, Ruth is a young woman and Boaz is a much older man. So he's telling the young men, leave her alone. So he clearly has sights on Ruth, and we will see that this is the beginning of a love story here. So verse 10, then Ruth fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground and said unto him, why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? So Ruth doesn't understand that God's favor is upon her life. So because God has favored Ruth, then he allowed Boaz, a wealthy, mighty man, to also favor Ruth, a young widow who is poor, who is not even an Israelite. She's a foreigner. Remember, she just came from Moab. And so she doesn't understand that when God's favor or hand is upon your life, that miracles can happen, things that you yourself can't explain can happen. So she's asking him, why have I found grace in thy sight? And verse 11, Boaz answered and said unto her, it hath fully been showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of her husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother and the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knowest not. And so here is Ruth's testimony. Right? So the good that Ruth has done has come back to reward her. So her good, the sacrifice she made, because it's a big deal to immigrate and leave everything that you know. Now we have, airplane which can take you to faraway places in hours. And so in those days, you'd have to travel. A trip that takes us hours would take long time when you're going from one country to the other. And so, not like say, I immigrated here from Jamaica. I want to go back home to see relative. I just get on the internet, buy a airplane ticket, and within hours I'm back in Jamaica. It's not that easy at this time with Ruth. And so this is a great sacrifice that she did when she left everything that was familiar to her. She left her mother, her father, and she left, her homeland to come to a land where she is a foreigner, where everything is new to her, including religion. And so because of the sacrifice that she has made, she is now being rewarded. And that's what Boaz is trying to explain to her, why she has found grace in his sight, because he acknowledged that she has done something that she didn't have to do. And it's all because of her love for Naomi. She had made the sacrifice, and that love has brought good reward to her. So verse 12, the Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. And remember when in Ruth 1 verse 16, Ruth had told Naomi, don't force me to leave you. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Where you die and bury, I will die and bury. Your relatives will be my relatives. Your God will be my God. So Ruth made a 180-degree turn. She totally sold out everything, for Ruth. And for Naomi. And so this is her reward for being totally sold out. Then she said, let me find favor. She being Ruth told Boaz, let me find favor in your sight, my Lord. And Lord is written with a common L. So when you see a capital L, it's referring to Jesus. If you see it in all capital, you're referring to God. So Lord in this case starts with a capital L. So this is an earthly person with status. So Ruth said to Boaz, let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for that thou hast comforted me, and for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid. And Boaz said unto her, at mealtime come thou hither, and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. So she was, after eating, she was satisfied. And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. So he's allowing Ruth to go in areas where other gleaners, other poor people who are in his field, to pick up the remnants of what's left behind where they aren't allowed to go. So here he's showing more favor to Ruth. So she's getting special treatment. She's allowed to glean in between the sheaves when other people can't do that. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. So more favor unto Ruth. So what he's telling the reapers is that they should, so usually they leave a certain amount of crop behind when they reap for poor people to glean on. And what he's saying is so that she will get more stuff. She get more stuff for her to glean, to leave extra crops behind. So Boaz is showing more favor unto Ruth. So she gleaned in the field until evening, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. So an ephah is a form of measure, let's say a kilogram or a pound. It's a form of measurement. And she took it up. So she took up the barley, and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. So what she gleaned, she shared between her and Naomi, her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. So here Naomi learned for the first time that Ruth was actually gleaning in Boaz's field, and Naomi knew who Boaz was. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord. So Lord here is written with a capital L. So we know she's talking about God, who has not left off his kindness to the living. So remember in Ruth chapter 1, Naomi, I told the people, call me Mara, because the Lord has not dealt well with me. So now she is praising God because she realized that despite everything, Ruth somehow ended up in one of Elimelech's relatives' field. And not only is he a relative of Elimelech, but he is a wealthy relative of Elimelech. And so she realized that this is ordained by God. Naomi recognized that this was God's planning. This was God's work. It was God's favor upon them. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto Ruth, The man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsman. So kinsman meaning relative. And Ruth the Moabitess said, He said unto me also, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest. So in other words, she is welcome to come anytime to glean in Boaz's field. So he had given her permission that she can glean in his field. And Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maiden, that they meet thee not in any other field. So in other words, Naomi said to Ruth, yeah, it's a good thing that you are gleaning in Boaz's field. You don't need to go anywhere else but to glean in his field. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean unto the end of barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So, this chapter 2, we see that things have turned around for Ruth and consequently for Naomi. So Naomi is the older woman. She is not able to go out and do hard labor like Ruth, who's a much younger woman. And despite Ruth not knowing anyone, God's favor upon her allowed her and led her to Boaz's field. Boaz turned out to be wealthy, and the Bible described him as a mighty man, which meant he had influence, he had people who worked for him, and God led her into Boaz's field. And Boaz not only was wealthy with influence, he was actually a kinsman to Elimelech, Ruth's father-in-law. And as I mentioned in chapter 1, that in those days when someone dies, when a man dies, and without children, so if he doesn't have any children, then if he has a younger brother, that younger brother was required to marry that childless widow, and the children that they have are raised up as the deceased brother's children. And we see that, I believe it was in Leviticus, when a young man, which I believe is Judah's son. Remember Judah, the son of Jacob, had 3 sons. The older one got married, and he was wicked, and he died before he had children. And so his middle son had to marry his older brother's wife, but he didn't want to raise up children to his dead brother. And so how the Bible put it was, he spilt his seed on the ground. So he was practicing some archaic form of birth control. In modern day time, we describe it as the withdrawal method, which we know is not very effective. But in this case, it worked for this middle son. And because of what he did, he went out against the statute of God. The statute in those days was the younger brother, if his older brother died and the widow doesn't have the children, to marry his older brother widow and sure that they have raised up as the brother's children. Because that's God's statute and he disobeyed God's statute, God killed him. So he died. And then there was this third son, which Judah, when he grew up, he was supposed to marry his older brother's widow, childless widow. And Judah, I guess he was blaming the death of his two sons on this woman because he didn't offer her his younger son to marry this widow. And she, learned that, this young son, this third son, is now an adult and able and of age to get married. And she, accosted Judah. And so even us as women, we have to know our rights. We have to know our rights and we have to stand up for our rights. We shouldn't allow anyone to take away our rights. And so she stood up to Judah and she fooled Judah. She pretended to be a prostitute. And when he turned into to partake of her prostitution services, she asked him for something because he didn't have anything to pay her with at the time, and she asked him for a particular thing that was unique to him, and he said that when he brings back payment for her services, she will return this unique token. And that's how she caught him, because he didn't realize he was sleeping with his daughter-in-law. And one of the children that she has is through the lineage that Elimelech and Boaz, because they belong to the tribe of Judah, came through, and ultimately King David, ultimately Jesus Christ came through this life. We can see how things are connected. And so here we have Ruth, being in Israel, end up in Boaz's field, a wealthy, mighty man. And Boaz, who was a much older man than Ruth, took notice of her, and he commanded his young men not to bother her. He also showed favor to her because he heard about what she did to her mother-in-law, how she stayed with her mother-in-law and was willing to leave everything that was familiar to her to immigrate to Israel with Naomi. And he gave her that as the reason for him being kind to her. But we know that it was all part of, God's plan. And so, he told his young men, to leave her alone. So clearly he had eyes, for Ruth. And, seeing that Marlon and Chilean didn't have any younger siblings or brothers, then other relatives are now able to be what they call kinsman redeemer, where they can marry Ruth and raise up children to Marlon, who was Ruth's husband, who's deceased husband. And as we go into chapter 3, we will see how we get more information on the kinsman redeemer. And so also, in addition to showing favor to Ruth, he told his young men that she was allowed to glean in between the sheep. So generally, the gleaners are the poor people who come after the reapers and pick up whatever is left behind. They aren't allowed to glean in between the sheaves. But he gave Ruth permission to do that. So that's more favor that he showed unto Ruth. He also told the reapers that on purpose they should leave extra crops behind, so she will have more to glean. And you can see that at the end of a day's gleaning, she was able to get an ephah of barley. I don't know in modern time what the equivalent weight of an ephah is. I should have looked that up before I started this, but you probably can Google how many pounds is in an ephah and see what pops up. But she clearly gleaned more than what you'd customarily glean just from what's left behind when the reapers go through and reap. And so she returns. She tells Naomi how she ended up in this field that is owned by a man named Boaz, not knowing who Boaz was. And Naomi explained to her, actually, Boaz is a relative of ours. He is Elimelech's relative. And Naomi immediately recognizes that the hand of God was at work here, because she went from her pity party of calling herself Mara and how God had dealt bitterly with her, and she starts to say that God has now shown kindness to both the living and the dead, because now she knows that her lineage of Elimelech and Mahlon will not die out. And she recognized immediately that God had a plan, and she used the word us because she knows that through Ruth she's going to be blessed. And sometimes, we have relatives, we have family members who are blessed because of God's favor upon our lives. Sometimes children are blessed because God's favor on their grandparents, because of God's favor on their parents, and so we have to recognize that regardless of what we accomplish in life, we never accomplish those things on our own. We are standing on the backs of others. And even yesterday, celebrating Martin Luther King Day, we realize that even as minorities, that, we have certain privileges because somebody else died for us to get those privileges, right? People die, both black and white, so black people could have the right to vote. And so it is so important that that should be a duty that every black person who is 18 years and older should strive to participate in the political process. Too many people have died to give us that right to vote. And so regardless of what we accomplish, I would recognize that we have accomplished it because we're standing on the back of somebody else. So somebody else did the groundwork. So our parents who may have been our grandparents or great-grandparents who may have been educated housekeepers or educated nannies. Now, with your college education, if you're an educated teacher, you can work in teaching. If you're an educated nurse, you can work in nursing. If you're an educated physician, you can work in as a physician. Regardless of what your education level is, you can work in whatever field that you are trained to do. And if you talk if you read history, look at old documentaries, you will see a lot of blacks who were educated but weren't able to practice in their field, or if they were practicing in their field, they could only work in certain areas. Like a black physician can only go to a hospital where primarily only black patients were. So things like that. So we have to know our own history. We know that there are certain states where they are trying to eliminate black history, and as women, we have to teach children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews history, regardless of what your color is. And that's how family history is lost, because nobody is teaching the next generation. It's each generation's responsibility to teach the upcoming generation about their history, about their culture, whether it's national history, cultural history, familial history. I mean, that's ultimately important. You know, if we don't know where we are coming from, if we don't know the mistake that we have made in the past, we are doomed to repeat them. Hopefully you learned something tonight, just like how they could testify about Ruth goodness, leaving, you know, our land of nativity to move with her mother-in-law to this new land. You know, the question should be asked of each of us: what can somebody testify about us? You know, if I should ask for a genuine recommendation from someone about you, what can they say about us? What can they testify about us? And, you know, James said, whatever, if we lack wisdom, we should ask. You know, we can pray and ask God for his favor upon our lives. We should never be afraid to ask God for what we need. And whenever we ask God for anything, we should be specific about what we are asking for. I heard a pastor preach about that about 6 or 7 years ago, that when we pray and ask God for something, we should be specific. If you want a car, don't ask God to please God with a little old car. You don't want a little old car. You want something that's going to take you from point A to point B without stopping in the middle, without you stopping it. So whatever we need, whatever we are lacking, it's okay to pray and ask God for it. And just like how Ruth found favor with Boaz, and she found favor with Boaz because Ruth had the favor of God upon her life, we too can ask God to favor us, to bless us with his favor. And as that pastor said, favor is not fear, all right? And but we can ask God for favor, you know, upon our lives. You know, whatever, if you feel like you're not a good test taker, ask God when you're studying, Lord, I'm about to study this subject. Help me to retain and to understand what I'm reading. You're about to take an exam. Lord, help me to bring back to my remembrance what I have studied. Help me as I read these questions to interpret the questions correctly. You're going for an interview. Help me, Lord, to answer the questions appropriately. And help me to find favor, you know, with the interview. You don't want to submit your CV and somebody crushed up and throw it in the trash and claim they never receive it. You know, before you send an email, you know, ask God to go with that email. And it might sound silly to some people, but that's what we need to do. We need to recognize who God is, and we need to ask him to direct us in every aspect, you know, of our lives. You know, before I go around touching patients, I pray and ask God to help me to make the right decisions. When I see these patients, when I take telephone calls, I ask God, you know, for direction. God bless you. When you have a chance, please read Ruth chapter 2, or while you're on your way to work or to school, you know, go to YouTube, do Ruth King James Version audio and listen to that book. It's only 4 chapters. It's an easy read, and it is not very difficult to understand. If you have problems understanding the King James Version, you can look at other versions of the Bible. You have the New International Version. You have the Modern Day King James Version that are a little bit more modern day English and are easier to understand to some people. I personally prefer the King James Version. That's what I grew up with. So that's what I prefer and what I'm used to. But we're going to continue with seeing how Ruth making that move, that shift from Moab to Israel, not only just leaving her family behind, but starting to serve the true and living God. And we have to realize that we can't serve 2 masters. There's only one true and living God. We can't be on the fence. We can't play neutral. We have to make a choice. And whatever choice we make, we have to be totally sold out with that choice. And we see that in order for Ruth to make the move that she did, she had to be totally sold out and to be totally committed to Naomi, and that was how she gets blessed. And that's what God wants for us. He wants us to be totally sold out to him. God bless you, and see you next time.